So tonight we're rethinking the system, and the particular system that I want us to rethink is the criminal justice system. And I think now there's pretty widespread agreement that there's probably no system that's more in need of rethinking. We know that we in the United States are the world's largest jailer, that we have more prisoners out of our population than any other nation on earth, that we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prison population. And so what I want to think about tonight as we think about the solution to that problem is mercy, the need for mercy in the criminal justice system. And by mercy, I mean, how do we view those who have committed crimes? Do we want to lock them away forever, to give them the harshest possible punishment, to put them out from us? Or do we want to restore them to their communities, to their families? Do we want to lock them away, or do we want to bring them back? And this matters to me because I kind of have a foot in both worlds. I am, on one hand, the family member of 3 murder victims, and I am also a public defender. In 1990, yesterday, April 7th, 1990, my younger sister Nancy and her husband Richard and their unborn baby were murdered in their own home. They walked through the door after being out to dinner with me and my parents to celebrate this pregnancy. And they found the killer waiting for them. It was a 16-year-old boy who had stolen a gun and waited for them, took them down in the basement, shot my brother-in-law in the back of the head, once execution style, and shot Nancy in her pregnant side and abdomen and left her there to bleed to death. He was tried and convicted and sentenced to the mandatory sentence he got at that time in the state of Illinois, and that's life in prison without the possibility of parole. And what that means is that you go into prison as a teenager, as a 16-year-old boy, and then you come out in a coffin. You die there. And there's no ever second look at you. There's no parole hearing where we determine, are you rehabilitated? Are you remorseful? Can we bring you home now? And when he first got that sentence, I was glad of it. I wanted to wipe him off my hands like dirt and never think about him again. But over time, I had a change of heart when I wrote about in a book of the same title, Change of Heart, where I realized that this sentence was merciless and that it was wrong. And so I forgave him, I wrote to him, I'm visiting him in prison. And I'm advocating for an end to the sentence that he is serving, life in prison without parole for juveniles. And part of why I did that is that when my sister was murdered at such a young age, I left my big corporate law firm job and I became a public defender, a job I've had ever since and still do today. And that's a job that's brought me up close to prisons and prisoners. And what I've seen there all along every step of the system in which I've worked is the complete and utter absence of mercy. Starting with when someone first gets arrested, the first thing that happens is that bail is set. And I'll tell you a story about bail from one of the courtrooms that I worked in. The first thing I do in the morning when I get to work is I go into the back in the lockup and I see people on the other side of glass, people that are locked up. And most of the people I see on the other side of that glass are young men of color. And that day I went and the lockup was crammed full of people who fit that description. And I looked at all the files for all of these people and saw what they were charged with. There had been a sweep of a burglary ring in the northern suburbs. All of these young men, it turned out, were in high school, were promising students. Most of them were athletes. They had no criminal record, but they were accused of residential burglaries. They were part of a mentoring program, and the mentor, rather than helping them launch them into life, recruited them to do these residential burglaries. Residential burglary is a non-probationable offense in the state of Illinois. If you do that, you have to go to prison. And when I told my clients this, they were in shock. And one by one, I asked them, why is it that a good kid like you is stealing? And it turned out that every one of them had a tale of woe, that they had been taken away from their parents as children because of abuse or neglect or abandonment. They were living in foster homes, the homes of overburdened relatives that were kind of resentful of having to take care of them. They were all poor, and they couldn't afford the bail that was set for them when they came out into the courtroom. And when they realized that they were going to prison because they couldn't post that bail, I heard from the lockup when they were all done the sound of wailing. And I went back and saw these young boys holding each other, clutching each other and sobbing. That is because they could not afford to post bail. No mercy. And the next step of mercilessness are mandatory sentences like that. You can't get probation for residential burglary. There are some very small exceptions to that, but for the most part that's true. And there are some charges like being a gang member in possession of a gun where there's no probation available, even for a first-time offender, even for someone with no criminal background. And I had a client who had just started his life anew. He was trying to leave the gang. He had a steady girlfriend. They had a child on the way. He had a job. And when he was caught with a gun that he had for protection, he was only offered the minimum he could be offered, which is 3 years in prison. Even though the judge himself who sentenced him said, I don't want to give you this sentence. I would rather give you probation. The next step along this road of mercilessness are sentence enhancements. If you do something and have a criminal background, accrue a certain background, that makes you ineligible for certain types of lenient sentences, and it jacks up your sentence to higher and higher terms. And so I've had clients that had done crimes as teenagers 20, 30 years ago, and then when they get caught for something later on, that criminal background enhanced their sentence. And I had a client who said to me, Miss Bishop, I paid my debt to society for that. I did my time. And I've lived a good life since then. How can they still count that against me? We do. The mercilessness extends to the type of sentences that we have for juveniles, the one I just described, of life without parole. It extends to states where they still have a death penalty, a sentence that truly says to someone, we are never bringing you back. We are going to wipe you off the face of the earth as your criminal punishment. And last step along the way, we have the problem of clemency. The governor of the state of Illinois and of every other state has the power to commute the sentences of people who are serving overly harsh sentences. The President of the United States has the power to do the same for federal prisoners. And yet, compared to the number of people who apply for clemency and who are deserving of it, there's only a trickle of these petitions granted every year. Sometimes it's done kind of on someone's way out the door, as they're leaving office, rather than as a regular part of their constitutional duties. And what that means is that so many people who are rehabilitated and remorseful and capable of coming home are left languishing in prison. The last thing is that there are so many people who commit nonviolent offenses, even drug offenses, where you can be locked up for life, for natural life. In the state system, I had a prisoner who had 2 prior drug convictions, Class X. When he got his 3rd Class X, which is having a golf ball-sized rock of cocaine in his sock, he was eligible for natural life. And it's only because the prosecutor in my courtroom said, this is ridiculous, I'm going to reduce the charge, that he escaped that fate, and that the taxpayers of the state escaped spending hundreds of thousands of dollars locking him up for the rest of his life. So all along the way, an absence of mercy. And why does this matter? Why does mercy matter? Sister Helen Prejean, a Catholic nun and the author of Dead Men Walking, says that people are more than the worst thing they've ever done. Mercy matters because we would want for ourselves and for our children, what these other people want, which is a second chance. And we can't want something for ourselves that we can't extend to someone else, that chance to show that you're worthy of being brought back, of coming home. Mercy matters because we know that people are capable of change. The young man who killed my family members is very remorseful now. He changed over time, between being a 16-year-old boy back then and a 42-year-old man now. I changed. My heart changed about his sentence. If he can change and I can change, why not the hundreds of thousands of people locked up in our prisons? And mercy matters because without it, we can't be fully human. I think one only need look at the brutal videos that we've seen of people kneeling in the sand right before their heads are being cut off to know what mercilessness looks like. It is inhuman. So can we change things? What would a rethought system with mercy in it look like? Well, starting with the bail, it would look like instead of having to post money, that we could have a system of risk assessment. Is this person a flight risk? For those young men who were in school and on the sports teams and everything, the answer to that would be no, and they would have been out of custody instead of in. For the sentence, the mandatory minimums, we could have a system where discretion is returned to where it should have been all along, and that is with individual judges, to judge individual people in individual cases. on their own merits and not through some cookie-cutter approach imposed by a legislature. It would mean a chance to earn your way out of prison, out of a sentence, by doing good things, by doing programs in prison. We have a small amount of people that are able to do that now. It should be extended to everyone. We should abolish this sentence of life without parole for juveniles. We shouldn't be locking up people who committed their crimes as children forever, no matter what they become. We should abolish the death penalty, which makes us more like the murderer and less like their victim in its mercilessness in snuffing out a human life. And we need to make clemency a regular and robust part of what a president or a governor does. Can we do it? Well, Governor Bruce Rauner in the state of Illinois has impaneled a commission to study how we can achieve a goal that he set, and that's how to reduce the state's prison population by 25% in the next 10 years. He's a Republican. There's widespread agreement among Republicans and Democrats now that we are in this era of mass incarceration and we need to fix it. We've got groups even like the Koch brothers, one of them writing in the Wall Street Journal saying we're incarcerating people for too long. And Newt Gingrich's group, Right on Crime, saying it's anti-conservative to be spending this much money locking up this many people. So we can do it. So why not? Why would we not do it? One of the arguments that made is on behalf of people who are victims' families like me, that we need finality, that we need certainty, that we need to have this legal finality of knowing that the person who got this sentence will serve out every day of it forever. But there's another finality, and that's the finality of not someone being locked away forever, but of being brought home, of walking through the prison gates rehabilitated, remorseful, and restored into the freedom of his community, that the case is over. The case is over, and the finality is not one of retribution, but restoration. When the person who killed Nancy, when I thought about him, I had this thought, that I'd always thought that the only thing big enough to pay for the loss of my sister's life was for his life to be taken forever in prison. But now I understand that the only thing big enough to equal the loss of her life is for him to be found. Those young men sobbing in the lockup, they need to be found, to be restored, to come home. And they are human beings with dignity and worth. And all of us, every one of us, need to see their wounds and recognize it, the need for healing in them, in us, and in our society. Thank you.